It's Ronnie Bringle again, continuing on our journey to paint a color wheel of fruit. Now, since I talked to you last time, I went ahead and painted the leaves here that lay over the top of the lemon. I want those to be coming from behind the pear in here, so I thought I would go ahead and get most of those finished up. I showed you last time a little bit how to do leaves, and for more information about how to paint the leaves, you can refer to the videos that I do called Terms and Techniques. It would be Terms and Techniques Part 10, where I specifically show how to paint leaves. So what I want to do now is continue on with my yellow-orange color on my color wheel. And so to do that, I've chosen to paint a pear. We don't want the pear to be quite as orange as what we put on our color wheel. We want to have hints of that orange color, enough so that you can tell that it is a yellow-orange, but we're not going to make it quite this orange. So I'm going to go ahead and start with two colors on my brush. One will be my yellow, and one will be my yellow-orange, because I want to tone that yellow-orange down just a little bit. I want to dilute it a little bit so that it's not quite so orange. So I'm going to be using my oval blender, and I'm going to be blending those colors together. I think I'll go ahead and start with some yellow. We'll just get that in place. I'm going to ignore this leaf here, because that can be placed right on top of the pear once the pear is finished. So we'll just start with a little bit of yellow here, and I'm just going to lay this on kind of thick so that it'll stay wet enough so that I can get it blended. Then I'm not going to wash my brush. I'm going to pick up some of my yellow-orange and kind of stir that around a little bit so that I have a little more orange on my brush, and I can blend that into the yellow. Now again, we're painting with yellow, mostly yellow colors, and we're painting over black. So obviously we're going to be getting some green for a few layers until we get the color built up enough to cover up that black. Now we could have started by putting a base coat on of some white or even some yellow, and that would have speeded it up just a little bit, but still you'd have to put that layer of color on and let it dry, so it doesn't speed it up all that much. So this is my first rather messy looking coat, and I'm not sure how much of that orange you can see. I'll add just a little bit more to make sure that you can see it. And I also want to start thinking about the shape of the pear as I'm applying these colors, so I'm going to be working in circular motion. I also want to create that little indentation. Sometimes I'll call it the waistline of the pear. This indentation here will have a little bit darker value and a little bit more of the reddish orange tint in there. So now I just have to dry this. There just isn't much I can do with this until it's dry. So I'll have to dry this and come back to it. Okay, I'm all nice and dry now. I can apply my second coat. So for a couple of coats here, I'm just going to simply try to build up enough layers of paint to begin covering that black. I thought I would go to the store and buy a nice luscious yellow, orange-yellow pear, but this time of year what they're featuring are the green tinted pears, not too many of the ones that are yellow that have the nice orange and red blush. So we'll just have to go from some pictures that I have and from what my memory is of how a pear looks and how I imagine a pear would look. We're definitely starting to get into the warmer values of yellow. Once we start adding red, we're definitely going to warm that color up. So we'll be going to from our kind of cool lemon and going into a warmer yellow on the pear. Just patting the color on and blending it. I might decide to do a little bit of stippling as I go along. And obviously my color is still wet. I can just lay this on and not move it around too much so that I don't make any holes in there. My color is still pretty wet, so I'll want to dry this again before I continue on. Now I'll try to tip this so that we can pick up a little bit more of those orange, yellow-orange tones in there that the camera doesn't seem to want to pick up for you. We might have to compare it in order to see the difference. You might have to compare it to the lemon to see the difference there, how that yellow is starting to warm up a bit. But I think it'll show up as we progress. I'll dry this and then we'll start putting on another layer. I've put on several more layers now and beginning to cover up that black background, and I think you maybe can see a little bit better now a little bit more of the yellow-orange color. It's difficult because the camera wants to pick up just the yellow and forget the orange part, but I think as we go along and we get a little bit more on here, you'll be able to see it. So now my surface is dry, and I'm wanting to really build up the opaqueness, the opacity of this paint on over this black. So again, this is just a repetition of using the yellow and the yellow-orange to build up the layers of color. Just was using the hairdryer in between times, so that paint would dry in a hurry. Now there's one thing I want to do before I go too much further. This leaf here is going to lie right on top of the pear, and so I don't, now that I know kind of what the shape of my pear is, I can take off a little bit of that paint over the top of that leaf. I don't have to take it all off, but I don't want to have a hard line right in there. So I am going to remove, just with water and my brush, I'm just going to remove a little bit of that edge so that I can easily cover that with my leaf. Okay, now sometimes when you're dealing with some of these colors, especially yellow-orange, is difficult, and especially since we're painting a pear and we want it to kind of look as realistic as possible. Sometimes we're going to achieve the yellow-orange color by layering those colors instead of mixing them up. So I'm going to pick up some actually naphtha red light in the Jasonia or the cad red light in the chroma. So this is my red value, or excuse me, my red hue, and I'm just going to, with water, I'm going to apply this in a very thin layer, and what I'm trying to do now is to create that roundness of the pear, just beginning to indicate the blush on the pear. But my main goal right now is to bring this pear into that yellow-orange color family, that yellow-orange hue that we want to place on our color wheel in this position. So I've got a little bit more red going there now, and I'll go back into my yellow-orange That was the straight red that I just put on. Instead of mixing it and putting on yellow-orange, I layered the red over the yellow, because remember we mixed red and yellow to get our yellow-orange. So those are the two colors that are in yellow-orange, and we can layer those instead of pre-mixing them and still get the right hue, but we're going to get it in a way that causes us to create an object that looks kind of realistic. Okay, I'm going to dry this again, and basically I'm just repeating. On this pair I'm just going to be repeating again and again until I get the colors that I want. Okay, I think I've got enough layers of color on my pear now, and you can see that it is starting to turn more of a yellow-orange rather than just the plain yellow that we see in the lemon. So that takes me to the point that I want to talk about today, which is value. When we talk about the value in our painting, it is actually one of the most important, if not the most important, aspect of our color knowledge. And why is that? It's because value changes can create form. So in order to make our pear look round, we have to create lights and darks. So when we talk about lights and darks, that's what we refer to as values. It's a light value or it's a dark value. And sometimes it can be obviously in between values. Those would be medium values. So the light and the dark is what causes our element to have form. The value changes from light to dark also can create contrast so that you can tell your viewer where to look. So if you have something that's a very light value as opposed to another area of that element that's a dark value, or another element that is a darker value, that will indicate to your viewer where where they're going to look, because the lighter values are going to draw the viewer's eye more so than the darker values. The value changes, light to dark, dark to light, also help to create the illusion of depth. So that's what we talk about three-dimensional. We're painting on a one-dimensional surface and we're trying to make it look three-dimensional. So we want things to appear closer and farther away. So in order to do that, we create values. For instance, on my leaves, I have a very dark value back in here on this part of the leaf, and that will pull that leaf further away from your eye, whereas up here on this part of the leaf and on these leaves that are more towards the front, I've created lighter values on those leaves so that they'll be coming more towards you and be closer to you. So that creates the illusion of depth or dimension on a one-dimensional surface. There are a number of ways that you can change the value. We can go from light to dark, dark to light, and there are several different ways to change value. One is we can use a complementary color to lower the value of a color. We can use a complementary color of the same value, and sometimes that will change the value of our color. We can use an earth color. Many times you can use the browns, the earth colors, which are yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, and burnt umber. Those are all earth colors, and they can be used to lower the value of any color. We can also use gray, and we talked about that last time. There are a number of ways to make gray. The obvious way is black plus white makes gray, but also the complementary colors. When you go across the color wheel, you create gray gray colors that way. So you're going to go red and green, orange and blue-violet. So complementary directly across on the color wheel creates a gray colors, which also can be added to lower the value or to change the value of color that you're working with. You can add white. We talked about that last time. White will produce a tint, but it also raises the value of a color. You can add black. Black creates a shade and it reduces the value of a color. And then we can also use the same color from a color family. So in other words, if we were working with Naphthol Red Light or Cad Red Medium or Cad Red Light, and if we were using tube colors, maybe we could pick up a darker value of that same color family. In other words, we could pick up burgundy, we could pick up alizarin crimson, and we could lower the value of our red by picking up a darker red, a tube mixed color from that same color family. So what I want to do on this pear is, the first thing I'll do is I want to lower the value to create the dimension, to create the form of the pear. I'm going to lower the value of my color by adding the complementary color. So we're working with yellow-orange. The complementary of yellow-orange is blue-violet. If we've mixed our blue-violet pretty blue, which we did, then we may want to adjust our blue-violet by adding a little bit of red to it. So in this case, on my color wheel, the color that I mixed, my blue-violet is very blue, which obviously is going to now create a more green color because you're mixing the yellows with blues and you're going to get greens. So I am going to adjust my blue-violet by adding just a little bit more red to it and then mixing it with my yellow-orange. So what I'm going to end up with is a color that really you almost would describe as a non-color. This is going to be my first dark, and I'm going to apply this in place where I want to create dark values, and I'm applying it in a very light, like a dry rub, just a little bit so that I can begin working with these dark values. Now I want to maintain my my yellow-orange color, but I just need to create darkness to show form. So at this point I'm going to play back and forth. I want to still try to maintain my yellow-orange and also my little red blush on my pear. So I'm going to use that mix of blue-violet and yellow-orange. I'm going to use a little bit of my Cad Red, my red hue. I'm going to use some of my yellow-orange hue, and I'm also going to use some of my yellow as my lighter value on my pear. And what I'm going to do is just blend back and forth a couple of times to create the shape, the form, the color, and also the realism of this object that I'm working on. Color-wise, I think I'm pretty close to the color I want my pear to be. I've got a little blur of color here on the edge that I did that I need to get rid of. And so I'll just use my little scrubby brush and some water and take that little blur off where I kind of went outside where I wanted to be. Now then, I want to create just a little bit more of some darker value, just to give it just a little bit more depth. So I'm going to opt for adding an earth color. What I'm going to add is some burnt umber, but I'm going to mix it because I don't want to do too much on my pear. I don't want it to go too dark. And so I'm going to take some burnt umber and I'm going to add my yellow orange to the burnt umber. So now I've got a nice brownish yellow orange. And that's what I'm going to use, just a little bit of that to create just a little bit more dark value on the pear, to create just a little bit more dimension, a little bit more shape to it. So I'm going to add over here. We're thinking on this project, we're thinking about the source of light being more in the center of the design, the center of the palette. So facing out towards the edges would be where the darker values want to go. And remember too that your dark values create the shape of the separate sections of an element. So here we have a pear that has this waistline where it dips in a little bit, and the pear kind of comes in two separate little sections. So I'm creating a little bit more darkness, a little bit deeper value in that, what I call the waistline, in order to create two rounded areas like what we see on a pear. And one final little blush to put on there with my red. Remember, we used our red and yellow mix of yellow-orange, but we also used some straight yellow and we used some straight red to create the realistic color that we wanted to create. So I've got my blush on the pear now, and now I'm going to think about my highlight area that faces more towards the light, my light source, which is in the middle of the palette, kind of radiating all out in all directions. So where that light would hit this pear would be kind of like right in here. I've picked up some of my yellow-orange and added some white to it to create a lightness. And then I would pick up some straight white, which would be the Titan Buff or Smoked Pearl, and I would create a little bit more of a shine on that pear. What you might call, if it was a real shiny pear, it would be a little bit bigger. It would probably be more in a round shape. It would be more what we call specular highlight. Specular highlight would be that glint of light that blocks the color. And so it would be like a very bright white highlight. But pears are not terribly reflective. They're not real shiny. So we don't want to create a real intense highlight on there and create a real intense specular light that would indicate that the pear is very shiny, because pears really aren't real super shiny. Okay, then all that's left is to dry that and add some of the detail of a pear, and I'll be doing that as soon as my pear is dry. I'm ready to put the finishing touches on my pear. If you would like to see a little better demonstration of the techniques of painting a pear, again, you would refer to the Terms and Techniques videos part 1, 2, and 3 deal with painting a pear. So you might want to refer to that for the techniques. And now that I've got this pear this far, I think you can see the change, even though the video, my camera doesn't want to show the red very much. Now that you see the yellow lemon and the pear together, you can see that we're moving now from this yellow hue into the yellow-orange hue. And now that you can see this pear, you can also see that as I painted my leaves, moving towards the pear, I started adding some some yellow-orange into the leaves as I moved into my yellow-orange spot here. So you can do that. These leaves are mostly green with a little bit of yellow. I've added a little bit of orange in here, and on this leaf. On this leaf I will do the same thing once I start painting that. Now, to create a nice texture on your pears, I have this fun little thing that I do, and I'll show it to you. I just use a regular kitchen sponge like this, and it's damp. It's not bringing, you know, it's not really sopping wet, but it's fairly damp. And I've taken some of my that brownish reddish color that I created by mixing my yellow orange and my blue violet, and I've smeared that on my palette, and I'm going to take my sponge and kind of round it out a little bit so that I don't have real sharp corners on there. So I'm just kind of holding it in my fingers so that I have more of a rounded surface here. I've made a mask of my pear, so I traced it on paper and cut out my pear so that I can just lay it right there on top of my pear and not get any paint on those on the outside beyond the pear where I don't want it. I'm going to tap my sponge into my darker color, my brownish color, and just tap that onto the pear. This it just creates kind of that textury look that pears sometimes have, and gives them just a little bit more realistic look. I like it very much, and I just think it adds a special realism to the pears. Now with the wet, damp corner of my sponge, if there's a place where I want to soften it a bit, I can just kind of tap at that just lightly with that damp corner, just to soften that out. So I rather like that. Then I need to create the little hairy blossom end on the pear, so I'm going to pick up my black and burnt umber together. So I've got a very, very dark brown color to work with. It's almost black. And I'm going to come right up to the line, right in here, and create a little depth first, and then pull some little hairy blossom, what's left of the blossom after the pear, after it becomes a pear. I think what I'll do is maybe turn that up just a little bit so that the angle that you're looking at isn't totally from the side, but just a little bit more from the bottom of the pear and not just from the side. Okay, then that gives us our yellow-orange spot on our color wheel. And next time we'll do, I haven't decided what fruit that's going to be yet. At first I thought it was going to be a peach, but I don't think I can make a peach quite orange enough to fill that orange slot. So I might end up doing an actual orange, which would be okay too. So until then, I'll see you next time.